Imagine two people standing right in front of you, and one is an absolute extreme narcissist who basically views the entire universe as their personal playground.
Right, like a place that exists literally just to serve their needs.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
then the other person is someone who has mastered, the highest, most profound form of infinite self-love.
Okay, two very different extremes.
Completely opposite. But, and this is the crazy part, if you put them in the exact same room and just observed their actions from the outside, you might not be able to tell them apart.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can actually see that.
Right. Have you ever noticed this in your own life? I
Yeah.
mean, we live in an era where everyone is constantly talking about setting boundaries, protecting their peace, prioritizing themselves.
Yeah, that language is everywhere right now.
It really is.
Huh.
But from the outside looking in, someone fiercely protecting their energy and someone like ruthlessly demanding absolute attention, they can look terrifyingly identical.
Because they're doing the same physical things.
Exactly. They're both standing in the center of the room, drawing this thick, uncrossable circle around themselves and basically saying, I matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly easy to confuse the two.
Well, the confusion is entirely justified, honestly, because they share an almost identical surface architecture.
Right.
If you only look at the behavior, the intense focus on the self, the prioritization of personal needs, drawing strict lines around time and energy, you are completely missing the underlying mechanic.
The engine underneath.
Exactly. To tell them apart, we have to look at the invisible engine that's actually driving those behaviors.
Which is exactly the mission of our deep dive today.
Mhm.
We are exploring a brilliant philosophical and psychological framework from a text titled From Infinite Narcissism to Infinite Self-Love.
It's fantastic, Reed.
It really is. And the whole goal today is to untangle these two identical-looking yet fundamentally opposite states of being.
And the framework uses a really fascinating thought experiment to do this, right?
It does. Rather than just looking at the, mild everyday versions of these traits that we all navigate, it pushes them to their absolute infinite extremes, just to see how the underlying machinery actually works.
Which is super helpful for clarity.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this because starting at the extreme negative end of the spectrum requires a pretty radical shift in how we normally think about human behavior.
It really does. It requires us to imagine what the text calls the absolute narcissist.
Okay.
So we have to strip away the colloquial use of the word. We are not talking about a coworker who talks too much in a meeting.
Right, or like a friend who takes way too many selfies.
Exactly. We have to expand the concept infinitely. In this absolute state, the person's entire perception of reality revolves around themselves as the singular, absolute center of the universe.
So they're the only thing that's real.
Yes. The self becomes the only meaningful reference point for literally everything that happens. If it doesn't affect them, it just doesn't exist.
Wow. So if the self is the absolute center, that completely changes the fundamental nature of everyone else in their orbit.
Oh, entirely.
Other people aren't even independent human beings anymore, are they?
No, not at all. They become reflections or, tools.
Like supporting characters in a movie where this person is the only star.
That's a great way to put it. And the framework highlights this incredible idea about attention, too.
Oh, right. It frames attention as a literal vital resource, like oxygen or fuel.
Exactly. In this extreme narcissistic state, attention must constantly be supplied or the identity completely loses its stability.
Because they don't have anything internal holding them up.
Right. Without a core internal anchor, the identity is entirely dependent on that external intake.
So they just have to keep consuming it.
Yeah. And if you map out the traits of this infinite narcissistic structure, it reads like a blueprint for emotional extraction.
Yikes. Emotional extraction.
Yeah, there is an endless need for admiration, an absolute entitlement to special treatment, and just a profound obsession with image.
And because the self is the only thing that matters, the text says empathy doesn't just diminish, it completely collapses.
It's totally gone.
Let's hover on that for a second, because the mechanics of that empathy collapse are wild to me. It's not necessarily a villainous conscious choice to be cruel.
No, it's actually structural.
Right.
Yeah.
If you are operating in a state where you are the only real, fully formed entity in the universe, empathy is computationally impossible.
You literally don't have the hardware for it.
Yeah, because you can't empathize with a tool. You can't put yourself in the shoes of a reflection. It is a structural limitation of their psychological architecture.
That is a crucial distinction, and it explains why there is this deep possessiveness over people and situations.
And the constant need to blame others for any failure, too.
Right, but again, not out of pure malice, but because the central ego is just far too fragile to accept fault.
Because admitting a flaw would destroy them.
To admit a flaw would be to completely shatter the entire illusion of absolute importance.
Trying to visualize this, a really specific analogy comes to mind based on that idea of emotional extraction and collapsed empathy.
Oh, what's that?
It sounds exactly like a psychological black hole.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. Like, if you think about how a massive star dies in space, it eventually runs out of the nuclear fuel that pushes outward and keeps it stable.
Okay, yeah.
And when that internal fuel is gone, it collapses inward under its own immense weight. The gravity becomes so intensely powerful that it rips apart everything around it.
Because nothing can escape.
Exactly. Not even light. And that's the absolute narcissist. Their internal fuel is non-existent, so they collapse inward, and their gravitational pull becomes so strong that everyone and everything around them is violently forced into their orbit, just to be consumed.
Well, what's fascinating here is how perfectly that physical analogy maps onto the psychological reality.
Right.
Because in a black hole, nothing is allowed to exist independently. Everything is consumed and crushed into the singularity.
Just totally obliterated.
Yeah. And based on that exact dynamic, the text arrives at a profound insight. True love is structurally impossible inside this black hole architecture.
Wow. Because you simply cannot love something you are actively consuming.
Exactly. Love, by its very definition and mechanics, requires recognizing the independent reality of another being.
You have to see them as their own person.
You have to see them as separate, whole, and valid entirely outside of their relationship to you.
But if you're a black hole,
If you are functioning as a psychological black hole, other people aren't independent beings with their own inner lives.
right,
They are simply raw material falling into your gravity well to keep you from collapsing.
that is so dark, but true. You can't love a reflection, and you can't love a tool.
No, you can only use it. Inside that structure, love just cannot take root.
But like a black hole that relies entirely on pulling an external matter to sustain its gravitational dominance, there's a system running on borrowed time.
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamentally unstable.
Right. So what happens when the fuel just isn't enough? Because, there isn't enough admiration on planet Earth to fill an infinite void.
No, there definitely isn't.
So let's talk about what the framework calls the structural collapse.
Okay, yeah. The structural collapse is essentially the inevitable breaking point. At some juncture, this narcissistic system just fails. It has to.
Because it's a math problem.
Right. No amount of controlling your environment can ever create a genuine human connection, and no amount of external admiration can fill an internal void.
It just doesn't work.
The math simply doesn't work. The internal void is infinite, but external validation, applause, obedience, attention, that's all finite and fleeting.
So what happens?
Eventually, the individual hits a massive wall of fundamental realization. Manipulating the outside world can no longer numb the internal emptiness.
Ground this for us, though. What does that structural collapse actually look like on, a random Tuesday afternoon?
Right.
Because I'm guessing a person doesn't just sit at their desk, do the math on their infinite void, and calmly decide to change their personality.
Oh, definitely not. It is rarely a calm realization.
I figure it's probably pretty messy.
Very. In practice, the structural collapse usually looks like a catastrophic burnout, a profound midlife crisis, or even a complete psychological breakdown.
Wow. So it's a real crash.
Yeah. It's the moment the CEO realizes that firing another executive won't cure their insomnia.
Oh, man.
Or it's the partner who has micromanaged and controlled every single aspect of their household suddenly realizing they are completely isolated and miserable despite having everything exactly their way.
Because the outward grasping completely failed to stabilize the system.
Exactly.
So the system crashes. But if that constant outward expansion for attention and control totally fails, how exactly does the psyche pivot instead of just shutting down entirely?
That's the real turning point.
Like if you are a black hole that has run out of matter to consume, how do you become anything else?
Well, that moment of catastrophic failure, that awful realization that external things cannot fix an internal structural problem, it actually creates a transformation point.
Like a rebirth.
Think of it like a supernova before a new solar system forms. The awareness hits a hard limit on its outward expansion and is violently forced to turn inward.
It has nowhere else to go.
Right.
Yeah.
It is a total paradigm shift. The core underlying operating mantra of the person's entire existence changes.
Because the old operating system was built on a very simple, exhausting command, right? Like, I must be the most important.
Yes, exactly.
Every action, every conversation, every relationship was run through that filter. But when that system collapses, the text says it's replaced by a completely new command. I must be aligned with my deepest truth.
And that shift from most important to aligned with my deepest truth, that is the threshold.
The crossing over point.
It is the exact moment where that intense destructive energy has the opportunity to transform into something entirely different.
The focus changes.
Yes, the focus moves entirely from controlling the external world to organizing the internal world.
Okay, well, here's where it gets really interesting and honestly, a little counterintuitive.
Okay, I'm ready.
I have to push back on this concept of the pivot.
Go for it.
Even after this transformation, the intensity of focus on the self remains, right? The person is still fiercely guarding their energy, still deeply focused on their internal alignment.
Yes, they are.
So if someone is intensely, aggressively focused on themselves and their boundaries, how is that not just a highly evolved, socially acceptable version of being selfish?
That is a very fair question.
Aren't they still a narcissist, just with, like, better PR?
It is the most common critique of self-love, honestly, and it brings us right back to distinguishing the underlying machinery from the surface behavior.
Okay.
The intense focus remains, yes, but the structural motivation and the final outcome change entirely.
How so?
Let's return to your physics analogy. If the absolute narcissist is the psychological black hole, infinite self-love is a stable sun in a solar system.
Oh, okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right.
Because a stable sun still has massive gravity and a huge, intense concentration of energy at its core. It is intensely focused on its own nuclear reaction.
Exactly.
But it isn't sucking the planets into it to crush them.
No, its stability provides the exact gravitational anchor that allows those planets to exist independently in their own orbits.
It holds them in a safe space.
Right, and it radiates warmth and light outward, sustaining the system rather than consuming it.
That's a huge difference.
It is. The focus on the self in this state isn't about feeding a starving ego. It's about maintaining a healthy, functioning system.
Which changes how you relate to people.
Completely. When the center of identity becomes internally grounded rather than externally dependent, you stop needing people to tell you who you are. You anchor yourself in your own truth.
And the traits of this state of self-love are basically the mere opposite of the black hole, even though the intense energy is the same. We're looking at internal validation instead of approval seeking. Authentic expression instead of constantly performing for whatever audience happens to be in the room.
Yes, and accountability.
Oh, big time. You start taking real emotional responsibility for your actions because admitting a mistake no longer shatters your fragile identity. Your identity is internally anchored, so you can actually afford to be wrong.
And this internal anchoring involves a profound shift in how you relate to others, too. There is a newfound healthy discernment about relationships.
Because you aren't desperate for their fuel.
Exactly. Because you are no longer trying to consume people, there is a clear recognition that others are independent beings.
You let them be themselves.
You respect your own time, your own energy, and your own boundaries. And crucially, you grant that exact same respect to the people around you.
Okay, so if this stable energy is inherently good and doesn't consume people, I have a massive problem.
Uh-oh, what's the problem?
Why do friends, family, and coworkers absolutely lose their minds when you start setting these healthy boundaries?
Oh, yeah. That happens a lot.
If self-love is just a stable sun that helps the whole solar system, why do you instantly become the villain when you start practicing it?
Well, you are hitting on what we can call the misinterpretation trap.
The misinterpretation trap.
Yeah. It is incredibly common, especially because we live in a world with a lot of deeply ingrained, blurred lines regarding availability, obligation, and, sacrifice.
Let's look at some real-world examples of things a person with strong, infinite self-love might actually say or think.
Yeah.
Things like, my energy matters, or I choose how I spend my time. And perhaps the most triggering one, not everyone gets access to me.
Oh, people hate hearing that one.
They really do. Now, to play devil's advocate, if you are listening to this right now and thinking of your own life, imagine telling a family member who expects you at a draining Sunday dinner, sorry, my energy matters and you don't get access to me today.
It sounds harsh.
To a lot of people, that sounds incredibly cold, arrogant, and undeniably narcissistic.
And that reaction is entirely predictable, honestly. And it depends entirely on the environment you are operating in.
What do you mean?
Well, strong self-love will absolutely appear narcissistic to people who are used to environments where self-neglect or constant availability is just the baseline expectation.
Oh, wow. Like it's just assumed you'll sacrifice yourself.
Exactly. Think about certain family dynamics or really high-pressure corporate cultures. These are often extraction environments.
Extraction environments, that's a great term.
If a system functions by extracting your energy without limits, then you putting up a wall and saying no fundamentally threatens the survival of that system.
Oh, so they're
To
panicking
them, your refusal to be consumed feels like a direct attack.
because they've mistaken your self-sacrifice for love.
Yes.
They've built an environment where love is defined by how much you are willing to bleed yourself dry for them.
Right. And this raises an important question. What actually happens if we cave to that pressure?
If we just go along with it.
Yeah. What happens if you ignore your own boundaries just to avoid being called selfish at Thanksgiving dinner?
You probably feel awful.
We often hear cliches about not being able to pour from an empty cup, but the actual mechanics of this are far more destructive. When you abandon your own well-being to appease an extraction environment, you experience profound resource depletion.
And resentment, I bet.
Exactly. You start harboring micro-resentments.
Walk us through the psychology of that resource depletion. How does a micro-resentment actually form?
Well, imagine you go to that draining family dinner when your internal truth is just screaming that you need rest.
Okay.
You are physically present, but emotionally you are simmering with frustration.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
By saying yes when you deeply meant no, you have just injected resentment directly into the bloodstream of that relationship.
Wow, into the bloodstream.
Yeah, you become irritable, passive-aggressive, or withdrawn. You aren't actually loving that family member. You are enduring them.
You're just surviving the dinner.
Right. And over time, that resentment builds up and destroys the very foundation from which healthy love could ever exist. By abandoning your boundary to save the relationship, you actually end up poisoning it.
That is so wild.
Self-love is simply the act of protecting that foundation from toxicity.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at this massive journey we've been unpacking, from the collapsing black hole of infinite narcissism, through the terrifying structural collapse, all the way to this stable, misunderstood center of infinite self-love, where does this ultimately lead us?
Like, what's the end game?
Yeah. What is the final destination of this psychological shift?
To understand the final destination, we have to contrast the core motivations of these two states one last time.
Okay, let's do it.
Narcissism is entirely built on a foundation of insecurity.
Deep, deep insecurity.
It is a desperate dependence on validation, a fragile identity, and a sense of competitive worth. In that state, you believe you are only valuable if you are better than someone else or if you completely possess them.
It's a very anxious way to live.
It's exhausting. But self-love is built on a foundation of unshakable stability. It relies on internal alignment, respecting the independence of others, and a self-generated sense of worth.
So you don't need anyone to prove it to you.
Right. Your value is inherent. It isn't derived from comparing yourself to anyone else in the room.
And when you finally reach that place of total internal stability, what the text refers to as the highest integration, the dynamic of how you interact with the universe completely flips.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the climax of this entire framework is truly beautiful.
It really is.
At the highest level of integration, infinite self-love and universal love actually begin to merge.
They become the same thing.
They stop being two separate concepts and become the exact same thing.
Explain the mechanics of that merger. How does fiercely guarding your own boundaries and focusing on your own internal stability magically turn into universal love for other people?
Because a person who is truly deeply rooted in their own center no longer needs to manipulate the world to feel safe.
Oh, that's huge.
If you have infinite self-love, you don't have to cling to people out of a frantic fear of abandonment because you have fundamentally stopped abandoning yourself.
You're safe with yourself.
Exactly. You don't have to play psychological games or shape-shift your personality to please the people in front of you. And from that place of profound, stable internal grounding, the actual mechanics of how you love others fundamentally changes.
The love stops being a transaction.
It becomes completely free.
No strings attached.
It becomes genuine. It is no longer based on need, emotional extraction, or control. It simply becomes an extension of a well-anchored self.
That is amazing.
You love others not because you need them to fill a void in your chest, but because you have so much excess stability and warmth that it naturally radiates outward,
Like the sun.
like the sun.
You aren't pulling them into your gravity well to consume them. You are just shining a light on them so they can grow in their own independent orbit.
That's exactly it.
That completely flips the scripts on how we usually think about boundaries and self-care.
It really does.
A person who truly supports themselves, who fiercely guards their energy, is not withdrawing from love at all. By doing that intense internal work, they are actually protecting the very source of love.
Yes.
The most stable, enduring love that can possibly exist out in the world has to begin with a perfectly stable self.
It is a paradigm-shifting way to view our relationships, not just with the people around us, but with our own internal world. It demands that we stop viewing self-preservation as a selfish act.
So, to you listening right now, whether you are on your commute, walking the dog, or just trying to decompress, think about your own life for a second.
Yeah, take a look inward.
The next time you find yourself feeling deeply guilty for setting a hard boundary,
Yeah.
or taking an evening entirely for yourself, or fiercely protecting your energy from a situation or a person that drains you.
Or an extraction environment.
Yes, an extraction environment. Remember the mechanics of what we talked about today? Remember that you aren't building a black hole. You are building a stable center.
That's right.
And igniting a stable sun requires a massive amount of energy, focus, and sometimes letting people misunderstand you.
It is the absolute necessary groundwork for genuine connection. Without it, you are just trading resentments.
And that leaves me with one final provocative thought, something that builds right off this idea of the highest integration.
Let's hear it.
If extreme, infinite self-love eventually merges and becomes the exact same thing as universal love, does that mean our capacity to truly, genuinely love the rest of the world is exactly limited by the boundaries we've drawn to protect ourselves?
Wow. That is a heavy question.
Right, like if you only protect yourself a little bit, can you only love a little bit? Does a lack of boundaries actually put a hard ceiling on your ability to care for others?
That is something to seriously think about.
It is something to seriously mull over the next time you hesitate to put your own needs first. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures in your own life, keep tending to your stable center, and we'll catch you next time.